on this computer. All right, so we are in the right spot. Let me share the screen. Go back to slide 1. All right, do we have the right thing going on? Michael?
Yeah, looks good.
All right. So take it away.
Okay, all right. So we're in week 10. Oh my goodness. And then we have a little typo in there, but so last week we talked about sort of the regulatory environment that that we all, that attractions operators need to sort of, deal with, right? And we kind of kept it very specific to the province of Ontario. And, we sort of talked about things like the building code and how we, how that applies to the sort of construction of, buildings, indoor spaces, that kind of stuff. So, examples of, exit capacity, where the bathrooms go, all those kinds of things. The, Health Promotion and Protection Act, which would obviously sort of covers all kinds of things from, food service to, right now, COVID rules and restrictions, all those kinds of things. Animal welfare legislation. So if you're a zoo operator or an animal attraction like a Zootopia or whatever Reptilia type of attraction, then you're going to have to sort of be aware of those things in terms of that. Employment standards, I think we covered it way back in the course, but then again about how those things would obviously apply in any industry, but you would have to sort of keep those in mind in your attraction. Financial rules and reporting regulations, and how you would how you sort of do your accounting, and how you sort of report your income and pay your taxes and all that kind of stuff. Liquor licensing, pool regulations, so for water parks or for aquatic attractions, things like that, and so many others, right? And then we kind of took a deeper dive into the TSSA and how they kind of deal with the licensing and inspection of amusement devices, and what are amusement devices, and sort of looked at those things, the inflatables and zip lines and stuff like that. It's funny, this week actually at work we had a very long conversation because we own some inflatables, and some people were not aware that we needed to license those, and they haven't been in a few years too, so we haven't paid those permits up or whatever, and they use them they don't come out of the box very often, but for birthday parties or special events and stuff like that. Like, well, and that came a conversation, and they're like, really? And as I mentioned in the class last week, that's one section of that code that very few people are familiar with. And inflatables are basically like the cheapest way to sort of get into, we'll call it attractions, right? In terms of having a ride or a classified attraction in your in the industry. And so
it might be the cheapest, but it's also the easiest way to get sued.
It certainly is. Well, it's really they're difficult. I'm not a giant fan, but they do have a high rate of sort of incident or whatever, because they aren't really controllable. But they're you even in your personal life, you'll see them everywhere, right? Like back when they had like outdoor events and festivals and this and that, because they're just so transportable. And that was the appeal of them, and it continues to be the appeal of them. And when we talk further about like things like the trade shows and stuff like that, you see tons of them everywhere. And certainly you could build a ride like Behemoth or Leviathan, and that will cost you $30 million. But you could buy an inflatable for a couple $1,000, and yeah, you could find a way to make money with it too if you just rented it out for birthday parties and things like that. So anyway, back to the TSA, we talked about that, sort of how to what those processes are, and in that it's it's a somewhat onerous process, but sort of tightly controlled in Ontario. So but yeah, that was last week. So anyone have any questions about what we covered last week, or comments or things that they wanted to add before we kind of move into this week?
we do owe you some stuff. So we were talking about that last night. So the one thing we will get done, and I'll send you an email once it's done, is we'll do up the rubric for the final assignment that we gave you a couple of weeks ago. You might not have even had a chance to get into it, but we'll do up a rubric because we were also starting to go through the latest assignment submissions, and those rubrics certainly seem to have helped. So we also owe you the marks for that. Mike and I will get through that this week and publish those marks. Really creative what we've read so far. So congratulations. Hopefully you enjoyed the assignment. Look, it certainly looks like you guys did because of some of the great effort that we saw that went into it. So we'll get you guys those marks, and then we'll do up a rubric for the final assignment so that you have a better grasp of exactly what we're looking for, and then you can just get that down on paper. Sorry to take away your momentum there, Mike. I do that all the time. I'm the yin to your yang.
I think we're okay. That was a good time. Yeah, no.
Naf, go ahead.
Morning. I do have a question about the last assignment. I mean, the last assignment, the way I understood it was like there is a group work of some kind, and you haven't really told us yet if we are going to form the groups ourselves, how many are acceptable per group, or like you will be assigning groups. Like we haven't got this to this part yet.
No, we opted just because it is everyone is sort of on their own. We're not meeting in class, and not everyone is even in town. We opted it was going to be everyone is an individual assignment. What we were talking about is that we are actually encouraging you to share your ideas back and forth between the entire class, much like the attractions world shares their best practices. So what part of the expectation in this in the assignment is, and it almost like an acknowledgement somewhere is, hey, I stole this from, like, so Naf, if you're doing it, you're gonna say, I stole this from Talis because I really liked what was being done here. And so this was an idea that we talked about, and I think it fits with what I'm doing. And then Talis could, would steal from Nashad, and Nashad from Brittany. Yeah, and that's a big part of why the attractions.
Yeah, my bad. I just remembered. Oh my God, my mind just went to blank. I forgot.
Don't worry.
everything.
It's quarter after 8 in the morning, so I wouldn't worry about it. And on top of that, if you were looking at that course outline, the course outline does say it's a group assignment, and we're making this up on the fly, as we knew what the outline was, but we're making changes as well, hopefully changes that are going to are going to make it easier and better for you guys as a class. We're certainly not trying to make things more difficult. We want them to one of the difficulties I remember, even when we were going to university or going to college, was trying to coordinate group work even when everyone was in the same town. And I watched, my son was home for the weekend because Trish was home from England for a couple of days, and he had to be on 3 or 4 different calls for some group projects, and 2 of them were a bust because people weren't prepared and that sort of thing. So instead of adding stress to your lives of trying to coordinate, we thought we would just do this final assignment individually, with the notion of, we do want you to check in with each other to see what each other is doing, so that you can, really at the end of the day, when the tide rises, all the boats go up. All of your projects should be better for learning what each other is doing.
Thank you. No worries. So thanks for the clarification. Thank you very much.
Hey, I'm glad you asked the question. We like questions. Means that you're engaged.
Yeah, we're not just speaking out to the void.
That's true.
That's the weirdest part about online. It's just like, I don't even know what's going on behind there. So,
well,
anyway,
but that's a good thing of having 2 of us, Mike. We can at least entertain each other.
That's true. Yeah, because yeah, if it was just that one of us, then it's just you looking at yourself on a screen with some names.
Yeah,
So
be scary.
anyway, all right. So like I said last week, we kind of talked about that sort of local regulation, sort of um, sort of area, and those are kind of the things that you have to sort of if you're operating in this jurisdiction, you're going to have to consider, and and those are going to sort of affect your choices or decisions or how you sort of approach your attraction. Um, Today we're going to talk about the sort of quote unquote the attractions industry and how that you know as Chuck just mentioned, the industry is very, very much a collaborative effort. There are, there are sort of groups and sort of associations that form up, and there's a lot of sharing of best practices. And then also, I mean, like any other industry, there are industries that support the industry. So there are your suppliers, vendors, the people that make things, the people that develop attractions. The example, Canada's Wonderland's not sitting there building their own rides, in the back. Like, they're not designing them and creating them. They're obviously purchasing them from somebody and doing that kind of work. And so, there's an entire supporting industry, sort of around attractions, and that all of those sort of interconnections sort of create the attractions industry as a whole. And you can say that you work in the attractions industry without actually working at a operating attraction, because maybe you're in something that supports that, or something that that sort of grows that. Like, Chuck, in your sort of non-glow zone life, you're in an industry that supports the industry, and as so we're going to kind of
Well, I'm just going to jump in and say, when you look at what the overall program you guys are in, destination development, I often think the word destination is a much better word than tourism, because when you think about trying to develop the destination, you need to have all those components in it: the attractions, the accommodations, the outdoor spaces, convention centers, all those sort of things. So you're right, Mike. It's a supporting industry for tourism, but it's also a supporting industry for attractions as part of that industry, because we work with the Hub Climbing, Joyride 160 and Canada, or 360, and Canada's Wonderland, and all of those other places to as a holistic drivers for visitation.
Mm-hmm. And while it's a competitive marketplace, so that the attractions are competing against each other for people's disposable dollars and their income, there, as I mentioned in this slide here, public perception matters. And so when you look at the industry as a whole, much like many other industries, whether it's the auto industry or anybody else, there is a sort of combined effort to make the industry seem appealing to the public. And when you look at the attractions industry, by and large, what you're looking at is issues like safety and quality that come out of that. And if the public thinks that going on a roller coaster is a super high risk venture, then you as an operator are going to have to fight against that tide, even if you maybe are not the people that are creating that perception. So if there's bad operators out there, or maybe the industry as a whole has just a giant problem, then you don't want to have to kind of fight against that. So a lot of the sort of associations and sort of industry connections kind of tie themselves together to sort of prop up the entire industry. And I'll come back to the water park industry a little bit later on, and that one is a great example of that, because beneath the surface of that sort of industry, water parks are really tied together in terms of safety and just general practice and how they operate themselves. And one of the reason for that is because they recognize very early on that if you have this one or 2 or 3, operators a year having these catastrophic events or bad things happen, then your attraction is going to suffer as well. So they saw that and decided to act on it. And maybe it was sort of an unconscious effort at the beginning, but it's certainly very purposeful now, where when you go to areas or conventions or meetings where there are a lot of operators together, then there's a lot of communication about issues of safety and all that. And there may not be entire agreement across the board, or that each park may operate in a slightly different way, but there are very, very sort of common elements or practices that they all do. And some of that's just agreed upon, or some of that just becomes what you would call like sort of the standard of the industry. And if you want to be a serious player, you need to be able to meet that. And that that's sort of how that kind of shakes out. So I guess what we're going to dive into is just see how those what those organizations, associations, what they look like. This isn't really a I'll say I want to be careful as we go through this. This isn't all of them, and we're not certainly supporting one or the other. We're just using them as examples of what's out there. We may speak from experience about sort of how we how Chuck and I as operators have been part of them, or have been sort of affected by them. But yeah, it's certainly not a I'll say it's not a sort of commercial for them in any way. It's just, this is kind of highlighting those sort of large common elements and why they exist and what they do.
Yeah, and we're talking about the ones that we're most familiar with, which gives you that first person perspective.
Yeah. So when I looked at these things, that they kind of fall into about 3 different sort of types of organizations, and we'll kind of cover them as in that particular order. Last week we talked about the TSSA, and we talked a little bit about how the TSSA sort of gets their standards. So we'll kind of brush on that a little bit. So where do standards and that sort of internal oversight come from in the industry? So what keeps everybody sort of on the same page? We're going to talk about some trade associations. So those are those sort of large umbrella sort of associations that generally attractions have to sort of become members of. So you may pay dues or you may not. It depends on the nature of the organization, or and it's sort of becoming a member gives you access to their sort of portfolio of information and development and all that kind of stuff. And then there are organizations that focus on the training and development side of the industry, and create training programs or certification programs, things like that help the industry as a whole, and create some uniformity across the board, so that maybe an operator in one area and versus another, they have the same sort of training level, and then they share those resources to sort of make the industry better. Okay, so the standard side, I think it's the easiest way to sort of cover standards, and really the big player in the room is and we mentioned this last week, is ASTM International. So ASTM International used to be called the American Society for Testing of Materials, and they changed that name I think it was about 30 years ago. You can see it was founded a long time ago, so it was not an organization that was founded specifically for the attractions industry. If you look at the ASTM, they get into all kinds of stuff, and you can see it was founded by a chemist working for a railroad. And if you kind of get into the history of it, it was because, they saw across, many jurisdictions that there were different standards for the handle and care of materials. And, when you look at railroads and things like that, they're transporting toxic chemicals, or they're fuels or things like that, right? And so they started looking and saying, okay, well, we need some body that's not government that can sort of sit and talk about these types of issues. So anyway, so they became known. They used to be called the American Society for Testing Materials. They changed their name to ASTM International because they truly are an international organization now. And so to use the word American would be in some ways a little bit controversial, or sounds like they're calling the shots when they're not. The ASTM International, as I mentioned, they cover a lot of stuff. So they have 140 technical standards writing committees. And what a technical standard writing committee is a group of industry professionals from all kinds of backgrounds that get elected up to the committee. So they have these subcommittees, and they have sort of a larger umbrella group. So you can be a member of ASTM. And that gives you certain abilities or access to sort of talk about what standards and what sort of rules we're going to apply across these stuff. And then the sort of the committee, which is kind of voted on by the members, is really a bunch of experts. And it could be, you know, chemists, it could be nuclear scientists, it could be fabricators, producers, all that kind of stuff. So that there are 140 committees, and each committee would look after a different industry or sort of set of rules. And yeah, if you look up on the website, it's tons of them. And those committees then have many subgroups that write standards for the industries that they serve, and those could branch out into, you know, hundreds of different standards and across those things. So when you're talking about 140 committees, you could probably multiply it by, you know, multiples of standards or working groups that they have. So they're touching into many things, you know, and quite a bit more than you could probably imagine. You know, and it could go, you know, some examples, you know, automotive industry. So talk about standards and design for cars, and, you know, how does a seatbelt work, and all those kinds of things kind of get built in there. And what kind of material do you have to make the strap from? And it just goes on and on. And the amusement devices are covered under a committee called the F24 committee. And the F24 committee looks after standards for design, construction, and in some cases operation of amusement devices. But they're largely about that design and construction things. So when you're talking about those fabricators, those industries that build rides and attractions, and that can get really big, because like anybody could start up a company to start building rides, but you need to be able to sort of look at those standards, because what happens is the ASTM, they're not a government body. Their standards that they create are not the law. It's a set of standards that are developed by people that know how to develop standards. They're the experts in that field. So you know, one example, you know, there's even a couple Canadians on the F24 committee that live in Toronto, and you know, one of them is an engineer who has a lot of expertise in amusement devices, and so she's on the committee, and so she can speak towards those issues. And you have operators on there too who will, when those, you know, when they come up and say, well, we need to do this, or this standard needs to apply to that, they say, well, that's really kind of onerous for us to do that. Like, I don't know how we would ever pull that off. And so there's a lot of back and forth and conversation about it. Ultimately, the goal is safety, and making sure that you know, that everything that's sort of put out there to the public is reputable, and you know, that it supports the sort of safety and sort of reputation of the industry. But what happens is these committees create these standards, and they take years to develop. It's a very bureaucratic process. So these things are going to get bounced around. You know, it's not changed weekly or something like that. These are like, when they want to go and revise something, it's a very sort of methodical, laborious process. It goes through all that kind of stuff. And then once that becomes the standard, and it's voted on, and it becomes, you know, stamped and says, this is, you know, ASTM, you know, Z whatever regulation, there are about 1 billion of them. You know, some will cover very specific, like very, very specific things, and some will be much larger. Those standards need to be adopted by a local regulatory body in order to then become law in that land. And in some places they're not, like they never get adopted, but the industry as a whole, as an operator, says, well, I'm only going to buy stuff that complies with ASTM standard. In Ontario, the ASTM standard is adopted into our local code. So in the TSSA, who we mentioned last week, who monitors and regulates the industry in Ontario, they drive a lot of their standards from what gets adopted or what gets created by the F24 committee. So, and that wasn't always the case, but, you know, in recently, you know, and I would say in the last like 10, 15 years, they've decided to make that so. So they've said, all right, well, we're going to, everything you submit to us, we're going to apply it against that code in terms of when I mentioned they do the engineering review and the design review of the attraction, they're going to look at that and say, does it apply to this? And so it gets pulled into, and that was called, there's a document in Ontario called the code adoption document, which would pull that in. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but if anyone has any, if I'm not making sense right now, go ahead and put it in the comments or go on mic or whatever. But the gist of it is that ASTM is kind of like this, they're creating these standards, and it's up to the jurisdictions to decide whether they want to create them as a legally binding thing, or if it's just something that's an industry code that's on top of things. But it is very international. So a lot of the major reputable manufacturers are going to apply their design and construction against this, because they know that most places are going to require it. So, if you're an operator in your, like a, Disney or, a Canada's Wonderland or a Bingaman's or whatever, when you go to a manufacturer, they're going to tell you right up front that this design or this device or whatever conforms to, whatever particular ASTM code or whatever now.
So Mike, with we were talking last week about when Wonderland brought in the first roller coaster in Canada with magnetic braking systems.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume that somewhere all of the engineers or whoever got together as part of one of these ASTM F24 committees to create a new set of technical standards for that new technology. And then once it was developed, then the TSSA just added it in.
Yeah, and sometimes the technology evolves so quickly that there may not be a standard for it, but there may be a standard that can be applied against it. So, you may have a catch-all that says, that braking systems must do X, and it doesn't say what the technology is that you're going to use to do that. It just says, however you want to sort of go down that road, you need to ultimately arrive at this place. And so yes, that's how it would work. And then sometimes when technologies become so pervasive, then they form a subcommittee under the F24 group to look at that and say, let's lock this down, because we're seeing a lot of this right now, and we want to make sure that there's some standardization across the board about it. And it doesn't get drilled down to the exact design, because from manufacturer to manufacturer, much like a car, a Honda and a Toyota are both cars, and you can trust that they're both going to take you down the highway, and you're not going to, it's not going to fall apart and kill you while you're doing it. But they use different parts, and their engineers have designed them in different ways. But at the end, they all meet a very similar standard, and that's that. You can think about that in the same way with amusement devices, that the parts may be different, but what they do or how they do it is in some way similar, or that their ability to resist failure is in the same way similar. So they have the same strength, or they have the same ability to make sure that, that it's not going to fall apart. And the rules, the ASTM standards will get really in depth. So you don't need to know them other than know that there's conformity. It's sort of like when you pick up electronic device, and there's about 1,000 different logos on the back of it. And some of them are radio frequency and all these different industries, or CSA approved and all that kind of stuff. As a person buying those things, all you need to know is that if they conform to that, and they're saying they are, then you're getting a product that is, quote unquote, safe and well engineered. This is the way I would sort of put it.
Okay, I got another question. So,
Mhm.
So last week you were talking about the TSSA and how they all incidences are reported up to them.
That's right.
Does that somehow trickle up to ASTM? So if they have let's use bungee jumping as an example, and over the years, people have realized that there are some issues with wrapping people's feet and throwing them off a freaking bridge, because it can cause some damage, neck, back, all that sort of thing. Does the ASTM then somehow, is there a committee that actually looks at these incidences on a worldwide scale and actually changes some of the technical practices to be more safe?
Not quite. I think, yes. I mean, there's no mandate, there's no regulation, there's no requirement to report these things up. I think, sometimes I'll say there is a push by the committee to look at certain things, and that's what the committee exists for. So they need to look at trends, and people on the committee will then raise something as an issue, and then it gets sort of decided by the committee if they want to pursue that. So yeah, in Ontario, the TSSA may be the ones that sort of sit there and say, okay, well, we want all these incidents reported up to us because we want to get data and see all those kinds of things, and then we're going to enact, sort of legislation or ask the Ontario government to enact legislation saying that you have to be able to do this kind of thing. But they have people in the TSSA that actually sort of sit on some of these subcommittees, so they can be the ones to raise that as a industry insider and saying, we're seeing a lot of X, so can we form a subcommittee to look at this? And then it's up to the committee to decide whether it's important enough or that it's widespread enough to kind of go down that road.
Okay. All right, we're ready
So,
for the next one. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So yeah, so this is just a little bit I stole from their website about the F-24 committee. So we already mentioned that. So it's been around for a while, 1978. And they sort of built out of that sort of industry sort of deciding that there was a need to sort of self-regulate ourselves and make sure that we're sort of covering ourselves off. So as you can see, it's fairly large. There's 350 members from around the world. There's the committee itself, 1,000 members, 24 standards. So there's, like I said, the F-24 committee looks after 24 standards, and they publish them annually, and you can, as an operator or as a designer, or, if you have anything to do with anything that would sort of be touched by that, then you can be able to sort of access that. But that just gives you a sense of the scale. I mean, it's a very large group of people, a lot of experts working in the background to make these things sort of happen. And yeah, they sort of gather, twice a year and do that kind of stuff. So when they meet, those are the times where, as Chuck mentioned, where somebody in the committee can raise something. And, it is fairly bureaucratic, so things don't happen very fast, but it would be
not with 1,000 committee members. Hopefully they
exactly.
don't all have equal votes.
No, it doesn't work that way. It's kind of everything funnels kind of upwards, right? So you have these subcommittees to the committee, and then sort of that kind of stuff. And to be on that sort of committee in the industry would be a fairly prestigious post. So you would have to be you'd have to be around in the industry or be recognized as an expert before you would even get a sniff at that. So
you're getting close, Mike. You're getting close. They're gonna fly you. They're gonna fly you to these meetings, and hopefully they're like in exotic locales all over the world.
Right. They won't even send me a T-shirt. So.
I was thinking, do they start with 24 standards? But now I'm looking at F-24. I'm thinking maybe they did start with the full 24 standards, or did they, have the number of standards grown as the amusement industry, continues to expand with new things?
No, it does. It evolves, right? So there are new, these standards try to be sort of catch-alls, right? Like we talked about that magnetic braking example. They don't have a standard on magnetic braking. They have a standard on braking systems, and then there'll be like a paragraph about it. But as a new technology comes out, they need to, as a committee, they need to evaluate and look at and see whether or not that they want to tackle that and they want to do they want to create a standard for that, and or is it covered in one of the existing standards, or can we apply, can we put that paragraph in an existing standard that's going to cover it? But it's hard to predict because the pace of change in terms of technologies in any industry, and the amusement industry is no different. That you can't predict next year what someone's going to come up with, right? Like you have these VR attractions going on, and you have these sort of different things, and obviously there is a bit of an arms race in the attractions industry to see who can sort of outdo each other, right? And especially when you're in very competitive market. When you look at something like Orlando in Florida, that is kind of like there's this massive concentration of attractions, right? And you've got the Disneys, the Universals, you have all these other players, the SeaWorlds, all those guys all in one city, and they're all trying to go after the same pile of cash. And so then they're trying to one up each other and building more sophisticated or attractions that have never been seen before, because those things will draw, an audience that, someone else can't do. So, when you take example like Universal, when they decided they're going to go into the Harry Potter world, they made it big. They built like that. The main Harry Potter ride is the most expensive amusement ride ever built. And it incorporates technologies that were never used in an attraction before. And so you just never know where the industry is going to go in that. I mean, usually the big players are the ones that splash out with the stuff, and then it's kind of like NASA, right? Who or the military will come up with the technology, and every once in a while it'll trickle down to the sort of general public use. It's the same thing, that some of those things that pop up in those really large players that have the very big budgets are going right out on the cutting edge. Those things will sort of slide down to sort of smaller regional and then local players. And 15 years from now, the technology that seems so high end is all of a sudden ubiquitous, and it's just everywhere, and everybody's doing it. And so it's very hard for that to kind of happen, but those wheels turn slow. But definitely, when we look at this is one attempt by a group to sort of tighten that down, right? So that there's not a lot of rogue players out there, or at least everybody's playing on the same field with the same rules. And it's not about affecting competitiveness, it's about affecting the reputation of the industry as a whole. So if I'm if I'm designing roller coasters, I don't want someone building them in their backyard and selling them at a quarter of the price to parks or attractions all over the place, and they kind of work, but they probably have a high chance of failure, right? So it's one of those things.
Well, I'm just trying to think, if this was formed in 1978, geez, we could fill up a whole Padlet, but we could, of what attractions didn't exist in 1978 that now exist that they would have had to add standards to. Now, some are variations on a theme, right? So there was, when did Wonderland open? 70 or
81.
81. All right. So the steel roller coasters were starting to come along. Pre that it was mostly wood roller coasters so now you've got metal roller coasters with loop-de-loops, and now there's hanging coasters and coasters that jettison you out. What's that called?
Magnetic launch and
all of those things.
Yep.
They'd probably fall under that same bucket of roller coasters, though. But then you look
but then you would get these things like a lot of it's like learning by trial and error, right? Because prior to all that stuff, you had all these players out there that were just doing stuff. They were building things, and they all had the best of intentions. I mean, they all kind of, they had engineers. It wasn't like they just sort of decided to slap together some metal and say, let's go put some people on it. But you would learn things about, like, okay, well, the clearance on this thing should be this, because there was an incident where somebody, got hit by a column or something, or they stuck an object out and it hit something and hurt somebody, or this failed and people got hurt, and so on and so forth. And the industry, the attractions, amusement rides industry was not really that mature, that far back. I mean, I think if you look at Disney itself, I think Disney World, what was the one in California was built in the 60s?
I think so.
It's somewhere around there. And so prior to that, the amusement devices were primarily the sort of the realm of those sort of traveling fairs and different things going on there. And they really weren't regulated. They just kind of did what they wanted.
Yeah. Well, I think they probably, the first permanent ones probably would have been the ones on the coast, like Coney Island and the Pier.
Piers, yep.
Where that's where those wooden roller coasters went in, and Ferris wheels became more permanent rather than the ones that collapse down and would travel by train back then, around to all of these different
Yeah.
fairs.
And and by and large they were mostly safe, but there was a fairly high rate of failure on some of those devices. When you talk about the Coney Island Cyclone, which is a really old roller coaster, or I don't know how many people in this room are old enough to even remember the Flyer at the CNE.
At the CNE, when that sucker derailed, that wasn't a good day. Yeah.
So the Flyer was a wood coaster that was, if you look it up, Google it, most of you have no idea what I'm talking about. But the Flyer there was actually a wooden roller coaster on the CNE grounds that would operate only during the CNE. But it was there permanently all year round. And it was an interesting roller coaster. It wasn't very big by today's standards, but it was a roller coaster nonetheless. And it had a lot of interesting things going on. You would not want to run it in the rain because the braking was friction based. So they would basically raise a metal plate up in the braking zone that would rub against the bottom of the train. And you would sort of slide on that until you stop. So it wasn't 100% guaranteed that if you change the coefficient of friction by making it wet, then your braking zone was going to be a little bit longer than before. And
yeah, or you had a bunch of heavy people on it, right?
Yeah. So you can see how it kind of evolved, and right now, I mean, there is no comparison, and a lot of that has to do with the efforts of the ASTM and their committee, that there's no compare of what the quality and the safety of an attraction is today versus what was prior. And a lot of it is about like individual players in the industry and in recognizing that we need to get together and make sure that like everybody's doing the same thing. Like I said, there are many ways to achieve those goals, but at the end result is you have to be able to do this. And that sort of and that came at braking system needs to be redundant and it can't fail, and all these different things. So it sort of got into that kind of level of detail.
So Mike, at Wonderland, you've got those coasters that have been there for 40 years since the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Have they been updated as the standards have changed? So you look at the Wildebeest and what's the other big the wood one there?
The Mindbuster.
The Mindbuster. Yeah. Have their braking systems changed? Have there been other changes throughout the years?
Yeah, and a lot of them are they're not forced changes. Yeah, the regulations change or the sort of the standards change, but remember that standards are always they're never really backwards compatible, right? So you can't expect something that was built in a different era to conform to a standard. It's the same as like, a Model T Ford is never going to meet today's, standards for an automobile. But yes, I mean, as an operator, you would take the best of what was out there and retrofit, change, and a lot of it is about safety in the end, or maybe it's about performance in some cases where you're like, they're spending a lot of money maintaining this thing and there's a better way to do it. But yeah, the Mindbuster and Wildebeest have been modified a number of times, and all those, and yes, the braking, the computers that run them, so they're all computer controlled, obviously. And in 1981, the computer that you would put on a roller coaster is not really. I mean, your phone is a lot more computing.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say it was a Commodore 64, right? Better than the VIC 20.
Yeah, and I mean they, a lot of rides back then used photo eyes, so like light beam sensors to as opposed to metal proximity, but they were notoriously bad in bad weather. So like those rides would shut down because the sensors would fog up, or that they would get a false report because of rain on the lens or dirt or something like that. Their braking was a different type. You can sort of, and some of it's about saving money because you're getting a better performing product, but some of it was just that you wanted to conform to a new standard, or you wanted to improve the level of safety that you had existing. And the one example, like when I rode the Mindbuster as a kid in 1981, I was actually, I think my dad got tickets and we went the second day the park was operating.
Hey, I was there at the same time. My dad worked for Honeywell back then, and we got in on that one of the first test days. I was scared out of my mind.
They were papering the whole market with tickets, I think, to kind of prop up the attraction, to really build hype for it. And so we went on the Mindbuster, and back then the lap bar was a single fixed bar, right, that went across all of the riders. And so if you were a child, there was a lot of room to wiggle around in that thing. And now they're all individual, ratcheting bars, and you would not be able to buy or sort of fabricate a roller coaster now that didn't have that style of sort of individual ratcheting bar, and that sort of comes out, and the design and what that bar is made of and how it works is directly mentioned in one of the standards from the ASTM about what type of material you're going to use and how is it going to perform, and all those kinds of things. And it'll get down to well, what is the range of people sizes that it needs to conform to meet certain things, and that's kind of how it all builds out. But yeah, definitely they do, operators do often have to kind of look at those things. And a ride doesn't last forever. It's like any other machine. You can certainly make it last a long time, but you have to inspect it, and as they get older they tend to need more care, right? Or they need to have modifications, and some of those wood coasters have been completely retracked because the whole sort of system needs to be redone. But yeah, that's a whole different thing.
Right.
So
hopefully you're enjoying what we're chatting about here. What's going on? All right. So I think we've got a little video, right? About
this just talks about it. So this guy here, Jim Say, is he's a manufacturer. Premier Rides is one of the many manufacturer rides. They build fairly large roller coasters and things like that. A lot of launched coasters, stuff like that. I don't believe there are any Premier roller coasters in Canada, but in the States there are certainly quite a few. And but anyway, this just a little video of sort of talking about how they work with the ASTM and sort of give you a sense of it. But it's fairly short, so I figured we'd just drop it in to give you a sense.
Okay, here we go.
People around the world love amusement parks, love to go to themed entertainment locations, and love to be kind of escaping reality if they can. And the rides that are developed by companies like Premier Rides in conjunction with companies like Universal Studios, those are rides that give lifetime experiences. And whether we're in China or whether we're in South America, somewhere in Mexico or the United States, you have to be focused on safety. That's a paramount priority of being part of the industry, is to really stay focused on safety. Premier Rides is a company that likes to focus on the leading edge of innovation. And to do that, you have to work with people who are on the leading edge. And those people tend to be the ones that have the highest expectations and also set the highest bars for themselves when it comes to safety. And those are the people that you will find involved with ASTM. In the world now, you'll see things that 2 years ago weren't there. These water jet packs, where somebody sees it for the first time, the entertainment industry wants to provide that experience to you, and they come to companies like Premier Rides and say, 1,000 people an hour need to experience something like this. How do you develop an attraction? And that's when we turned to ASTM, because ASTM will provide very quickly safety standards for that new type of equipment. The F24 Amusement Ride Committee is interesting because of its diversity. And the idea of consensus standards is really making sure that you have the opinions of very diverse groups of people. Imagine Universal and Disney sitting side by side and openly discussing their safety programs, their safety procedures. Consumer groups like the CPSC will participate, and you'll have private safety groups that their information is very unique, and so it's equally valuable to the information that you might get from a big operator. And it's only with all of these people's input do you really get that consensus approach to making a safety standard and producing rides.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. So I thought that video did a really good job of sort of summing up the discussion, right? About how you've got this sort of committee that's, as he said, is sort of built by consensus, that you have all these different players. So some of them he mentioned are like the CPSC would be kind of the US version of, not quite the TSSA, but a little bit higher up to the Consumer Product Safety Commission, who, they look in the United States on like every product and make sure that it's, safe for public use. But you have all of these different players. So you have manufacturers, you have operators, like you said, you have Disney and Universal in the same room talking about safety standards and agreeing or trying to agree on what to do. And it's a very unique, situation. And so you have buy-in from all of the different components of the industry. So from the regulatory side to the people that are manufacturing to the people that are operating and everything in between that can sit down and say, okay, well, let's throw these things, thing. And then you have, everybody has a different, I'll say, motive or interest, right? So you can't have one sort of, if you, let's say, had all of the standards being created by operators, then they would tend to want to go towards the sort of cheapest, most efficient, best for me business sort of approach, where, maybe the, manufacturer would be going one way, and then the sort of governmental bodies would be going another way. And if you have one person controlling that discussion, then it may become almost impossible to create something that would be feasible, because there's always a give and take, right? Because as an operator, you need to be able to operate this. If the standard all of a sudden, bottleneck you down, and the great example would be like this year with COVID restrictions, right? You have these COVID restrictions that are built for public safety, and they're not, obviously they were never built to have any input from the operators, because the operators would be like, I don't do that. But when a park opened at the beginning of this year and they were allowed to open, they were said, okay, well, you need to have this much distancing between each person, and you do all those things. So you took a ride that maybe did like 1,500 people an hour capacity and turned into a ride that did 200 people an hour capacity. And as an operator, that's a nightmare, because now your lineups are big and people aren't happy and you can't put as many people through, or maybe, there's all different things built in there. So there's a way to, with this, about kind of putting it all together and making it so that you have a sort of workable sort of framework, and then you can apply that internationally, which is, it's a really big dynamic. So does that
Very
make
cool.
sense?
Yeah, is any questions about what we've done so far? Hopefully it is the more dry of the topics that we'll be talking about last week and this week, but I'm hoping that that you're enjoying it so far. If there are no questions, why don't we, it's 9:03 on my clock here, why don't we take 7 minutes for everyone to refresh their coffees or do what they need to do, and we'll be back at 9:10. Are we good with that? Mike, you're okay. Perfect. So we'll see you in 7 minutes. All right. I took my earphones out. Now that the kids are gone, I don't think I need them.
Yeah. Jen's downstairs. She's on her things, like a virtual day here in the house. And the cat is banging on the door, wants to come in. And I'm like,
Oh.
ain't happening.
Nice.
Oh, yeah. She's having a full-on meltdown right now.
Yeah. Now
Is that microphone better now, Chuck?
Yeah, I can hear it a bit better. It was just, and like I said, it wasn't bad. It was just a little scratchy. All right, everyone, give us a thumbs up if you're back, or there's one, or right in the there's two. All right, give it one more second here. Yeah, so just write in the chat when you're back. Oh. All right, Michael, let's take it away.
All right. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the sort of trade associations bit here, and what they sort of do and how they support it, and what are the benefits of this, and then these trade associations are definitely voluntary. I mean, if you're an attractions operator, you don't have to be part of any of them. You can kind of do your own thing, but there's certainly a benefit to being connected to a wider industry. And as we mentioned before, those there's a lot of sharing of sort of ideas, best practices, concepts, things like that. And this is kind of the places where you get exposed to those things. And as an operator, you're always kind of looking for that sort of what can make you better, what can I add to my to my attraction, whether you're looking for that next big ride, or maybe in a smaller case, I just want to be able to make pizza faster. There are different ways of handling that. And without these sort of connections, it's you're on your own. You got to go, or you're going to have to wait for somebody to cold call you, and then you're like, that's a great idea. But these associations really help drive the industry, drive change and training and education, and just create a better industry as a whole. So as I listed here, what are some of the benefits? So mention, you connect with it, you connect the attractions industry with the supporting industries, those vendors, suppliers that are exist to support the attractions industry, that they are the sort of the sub players. They don't have a guest facing sort of operation, but they definitely supply the industry. Education and training. Where do you as a operator learn to what's the latest and greatest, or how to sort of make your operation better. Sometimes you need help as a smaller player. You might need help to sort of lobby for change, whether that's regulatory or government rules, things like that, or just speak for you. During the COVID situation, these associations spend a lot of time working with government to talk about what are some responsible ways in which these attractions could open. In a lot of cases, the 2020 season didn't exist for these operations. And when you're a seasonal business, it's not about missing a month or two, it's about missing a year. And there's obviously livelihoods and people's sort of investments at stake. And this is when you're a small player in a big pond, it helps to have sort of a community to sort of push those things along. Sometimes it's about public perception. So, how do you get your message out about, the cool things that the industry is doing, or our high level of safety, in terms of, that, just sort of getting over those things about talking about, how we really take care of that and making sure that it's a safe experience and it's something that you want to do. And to share best practices, and that could be, safety, technology, it could be sales and marketing, it could be, new product, things that are doing well. A lot of the things that you see kind of come and go out of parks, or these sort of trends, usually started those things where one sort of, in one area of the world, a certain product or whatever, or a, food item or whatever will really take off. And it becomes, sort of widespread. And how does that happen? Because of these things. And, we'll kind of talk through that. Maybe, you know, Chuck, you can have some examples too of,
Yeah.
you know, with Glow Zone, how you guys took these sort of learnings and applied them to your business to make it is the best that it could be. Because in the end, you know, we're in it for, you know, we're in it to be profitable. It's, you know, obviously there's a lot of side benefits about, you know, being fun and sort of providing those memories and all that kind of stuff. But as an operator, your bottom line is your bottom line, just like any other business. So, okay.
All right.
So we've listed up here some of them that you would, some of the associations that you'd get involved in, or that you could get involved in, or just to give you an example of what they are. And you know, I'm not going to kind of talk to each one of them. We're going to talk a little bit about IAAPA because it's so big, and you know, I think it really kind of hits all of those bullet points that we talked about in the previous slide about what they do for their members. But, you know, certainly it's not going to be a pitch to become a member of that. But this just gives you an example of the breadth of it. And if you went down the rabbit hole, you could find more and more and more and more agencies and associations that sort of do it. Yeah, Chuck?
No, I was just going to say, you know, look at what we've got up here. We've added a little bit in because this section, the TSSA, all of this health and safety and standards really go to, you know, attractions in the terms of rides and amusement parks and theme parks. But the support systems for all attractions, like museums, is up here. Tomorrow I've got a meeting with the Ontario Trails Council. So we know that we've talked, you know, anything that's attracting people to an area to spend money. So we're actually having a meeting to talk about how do we monetize the free trails. And I'm not saying we're going to have people pay to go on the trails, but how do you connect the people on the trails to the rest of the community that they're going to? So those are the sorts of things that like every industry has it. So you guys did that awesome project where you were building out a corn maze, right? Well, in terms of support systems for that type of new attraction, there's a ton of different places you could go. You're small, you probably wouldn't go right to IAAPA, but you could go to the Ontario Farm Fresh Alliance because they would be able to connect you with others who have done corn mazes. Or you could go to Attractions Ontario, who would either connect you or help you with your thoughts on marketing, right? There's a ton of different support systems that are out there. We pulled up this one down at the bottom here, the International Laser Tag Association. I own a laser tag place. I had no idea that place existed, to be honest with you.
I think it sounds really kind of cool. I'd like to be a member of the International Laser Tag Association.
Oh, it said it closed. That's why I don't know about it. It closed in
there we go. 2013. So there you go.
There we go. So it's not that I didn't know about it. It just doesn't exist in my reality.
They probably got absorbed, or they got absorbed into something larger like IAAPA and the FEC committee or something like that. But
that's true.
But yeah. So these are examples of these associations that exist. And I would say any sort of genre of these sort of attractions world, you will be able to find an association that applies to it. And some of them are a little bit more specific, and some of them are more sort of broad in terms of their scope. But, you know, all of them exist in some way, as Chuck mentioned, to support the industry and support the people that sort of want to be that sort of front of line sort of operators of these, you know, attractions or amusements or things like that. And it helps to sort of make the industry stronger as a whole, because you get to share this sort of breadth of knowledge. So you don't have to go out there on your own and do that, you know, like, yeah, Chuck's example in the corn maze thing, you know, maybe you need to buy decor, or you need to build, you know, you want to know how do you actually build a corn maze? You know, you're going to find in one of these groups, there's somebody who connect you to somebody and say, yeah, I've done that before, or here's a vendor you should talk to because they actually sell a product that makes it possible for you to do what you're dreaming of. And, you know, that sort of links in, or they may say, well, you know, maybe you want to, your corn maze is going to have a hot dog cart. So where do you get these things from, or what are the products, or maybe there's some other product that you think would work for it, you know, the pumpkin spice, you know, funnel cake or something like that. You're going to find it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing would be, if you don't know what's going to sell best, there's all those places that'll tell you, okay, well, hot dogs don't work so well, but a corn dog does because you're in a corn maze, right?
Mhm.
So you would be able to steal the best practices from these other people to have a better chance of success in your first year. Very, very few businesses ever break even in their first year of operation because of the investment that has gone into building it, and then the ramp up of trying to get people to know about it. And you don't have to cover all of it. It costs, each of our glow zones costs 1.2 to 1.3 million dollars to build. We pay that back over the course of 5 or 6 years. So we didn't have to come up with the whole 1.2 in sales in the first year, but we still needed to come up with a portion of that plus cover our operating expenses, the staffing and the cost of sales and that sort of stuff. So it takes a while to do it. So anything that we could use and learn that made it so that we had a better chance of breaking even in our first year was a good thing, and we did our best to figure it all out. What's next
Yeah,
on this
and-
slide here, Michael?
So this is a video that sort of talks about the IAAPA trade show, which we're going to dive in a little bit bigger in a bit. But this is probably they have several trade shows, but the main one, the Expo, which takes place in Orlando typically. Yeah, and I actually it opened today.
Yeah.
So down in Orlando. It is by far the largest trade show in the attractions industry, and it is it's massive. But anyway, this just kind of, I think this is another one of those like little 1-minute videos that just sort of talks about, it kind of gives you a sense of what it's about.
Yeah.
So, I figured it was easier for me to show this than to explain it.
I think it's one of the largest trade shows in the world.
It's pretty big.
Yeah.
So.
I think the only two places that can hold it are the Orlando Convention Center and Vegas, right?
Yeah.
There's nowhere else that it would fit. So let's get into this.
It has the latest and greatest and everything up to date that could really build your inventory.
It's great. You get to see what's new in other countries, in Japan, in China, in Mexico, in South America. What's gonna be a trend? It's important. So you gotta learn for what's going on all over the world. And everybody who is somebody in the industry has to be here or is here.
You could get new ideas and get those ideas to improve your business.
If you're considering coming to IAAPA, definitely get down here. It's something you don't want to miss.
All right. So I think what we're going to do, I'm going to escape out of this in a second. And I'm going to stop sharing because we're going to go what I've got here somewhere. Let me find it. Is this year's trade show floor. Are you seeing that?
Yep.
Okay. To give you a sense of the scale, I went not last year, I went the year before. Mike, you've gone several times, but it was my first time going down there. Usually it's Ryan from our team that has gone down year after year. And a couple of years ago, Ryan and I went down together because he said you have to go and experience it to really understand it. It took us 3 days to walk this floor. And it is there's all of this is indoor, and then this is a smaller, not everyone showed up this year, it looks like, from a supplier standpoint, because both of these outdoor areas, this was a massive tent that was about the size of this space. And then these were all of the outdoor Ferris wheels and attractions and things like that. And what we thought we would do is, just go in and you can see, all of the different people that are there. And what you can buy and what you can learn about.
Mm-hmm.
So Mike, why don't you talk about your experiences?
Yeah, I think, I've been there many times, and I think, as Chuck said, it's massive, and it does take it'll take you days to cover the whole floor. And we usually tackle it as usually they put it the map beforehand, and we'll have kind of a list of things that we want to do, and they'll even have guided tours. Like, if, let's say, you're interested in buying a ticketing system, then you would sign up and say, well, hey, there's a guided tour that will leave at 10 a.m. with a guide, and they'll take the group to all of the vendors there, and each vendor has sort of their pre-canned presentation for you, and you'll walk through that, and you have your headsets on so you can hear what's going on, or you can kind of tackle it on your own. But it is absolutely, if you want to kind of get the breadth of the entire industry in terms of all of the components and places that you can go into, this is where it is. And you will stumble upon stuff you've never even seen before, which sort of creates this like idea in your head about, okay, well, this is what we could do. Or what we've when we're kind of researching what product or things that we're going to do, to go through it. Yeah, it'll take you days to walk it. If you want, if you zoom back out, Chuck, to give you an example of size, because the thing doesn't, give you, so there's a door on each side, so you can enter the building on sort of the left or the right side of this map. If, let's say, the vendor was on the left side and you were on the right side, the fastest way to do that is they have a bus that takes you around the building to get there, because to walk it would take you a long time. It is a massive, massive building. And but the idea behind this trade show is that this is the sort of nexus of all of the bits and pieces of the industry. So they have it grouped out with like rides and attractions. They have food. They have specialty products. I think if you zoom in, you can see like
the food. Here's the F&B pavilion, and it's surrounded by the family entertainment pavilion. So this is where where Ryan and I spend a bit of time. Creative Works is one of the vendors that created the mini golf and the laser tag for us. But then, because we had gone there, we then layered up with 2 or 3 other organizations, one to provide the vests, and one who did this thing called Arena X, which takes the laser tag to the next level. So suddenly, and we actually put these guys together because they hadn't been working together in in the way that we needed them to work together. So we were taking what was some new and emerging technologies, and we made sure that they partnered together to make everything work, so that the back end of the laser tag software, then it also incorporated all of this new technology of what are when we tag those lights, it is an RFI technology.
Oh yeah, the RFID and QR codes and all those other things.
Yeah, there's a whole ton of different technologies that are in there. And then we also see what else is out there that we might be able to incorporate to add another attraction or add another revenue source. And like I said, there's
the blue one is the inflatable pavilion.
Yeah. This whole thing, it's crazy.
So it's insane as you go, but that gives you a sense of like how the industry, is, when we talk about, there's just many different flavors in the way that you can, it's not easily definable, right? And the attractions industry is just so many different things. So to have them all kind of come together in this way kind of gives you a real sense of the breadth of it. I think there's an area there for themed attraction development. So, the big players that, would design the stuff like, large attractions, themed attractions, like that one.
There's a themed entertainment.
Yeah, and JRA is Jack Rouse and Sally Dark Rides, and all these people. If you wanted to develop a very large themed attraction, and it could be a mini golf that looks like a pirate wreck, or it could be a dark ride attraction, or just something, even a major amusement park, someone in there has the expertise to do that. and they'd be able to sort of get you going. One I was looking at, like ProSlide Technology. I talked about them in one of the classes there. ProSlide Technology, one of the world's largest designers and fabricators of water slides, right from Ottawa, Ontario, right there. So if you wanted to get into the there we are, there's their profile, right? So if you wanted to get it, wanted to build yourself a water park, then these would be people that you would want to talk to, right? In terms of what they do. They build it. They're a builder, they're not an operator, but they manufacture, design. And you could sit there and you could sort of meet those people or get a sense of what the latest and greatest coming from. Forec is from Toronto as well. Yes. Forec is a design company. Forec actually designed,
internationally known. Like this is a huge company.
Yeah, Forec actually designed Canada's Wonderland way back when. And they've designed, so many parks and resorts and themed things or whatever. Forec had some developmental, even Ontario place. We worked with Forec on some design. But you can see, actually, it gives you a sense too that the Canadian industry is very strong. We're very, there are Canadian companies that are very large players in the attractions world.
What's the other one? Is Lord, right? That's the other big one, isn't it?
Yeah. And then JRA is a big one too. Jack Rouse.
I hit the wrong button here. I'm just trying to do a little scroll. So when we went down, we spent some time in the inflatable. Basically, just because we were just walking aisle by aisle. And that's sometimes the best way to do this show. That's why it takes 3 days, because you don't know what you don't know. So we wandered into the inflatable section, and lo and behold, and I can't remember who it was. I think it was Easy Inflatables. They had set up a 30 by 30 inflatable covered glow-in-the-dark laser tag inflatable, and it wasn't themed us or anything, but we were suddenly thinking, never thought about it before, but what an incredible opportunity. What if we were to invest? It was like 60 grand. Like, they're not cheap, but they're certainly not as expensive as 1.2 million. What if we were to invest in buying one or two of these and take them? One of the issues that we find is with group sales, the school groups, they have a harder time coming. Busking costs, all these sort of things, being allowed to leave the school. What if we reached out to the school boards and all the day camps and we took the inflatable to them so they could have a laser tag experience in their gym, or they could have the laser tag experience out in the playground, and just charge a certain amount of money for a day or whatever. And it was something that only happened because we were down at IAAPA and saw something that we didn't even know existed. So we haven't done it yet, mostly because COVID hit and money has been tight. But it's certainly, with some of these new grants and everything that are coming out, there's an opportunity here to expand our business model. We talked to them extensively about, could they theme it? Could they make it a glow zone inflatable? Instead of this, they're just using their color schemes that were there. Make sure that it's branded, and all the vinyl or whatever the heck they use to make an inflatable is all our color scheme, is all glow zone. And what we're doing is we're building our own internal business case to see, well, how many bookings would we need to make this profitable over 5 years? Because once again, it probably wouldn't be profitable in the first year. We'd need someone to run it. We would almost need to run it as a separate business unit, because it is so different from our bricks and mortar, but it's all at the same time. It's an incredible tie-in back to the organization, and you could do it so that every you go to a school and every kid gets to play 1 or 2 games, and you double up on your vest, so that as one group is playing, you'd be vesting the second group. This is going back into the operations of it, attractions operations. How do we get the throughput, right? So that as soon as the kids come out, the next group can go right in, and then you vest the next group and you can put through more kids. then on the marketing side of things, you'd give every single kid a 2-for-1 pass, right? And then every single kid would now know that there's a glow zone in their community somewhere, and hopefully we'll get some more people coming to play. So IAPA is the only reason we knew about that, and so that's just an example.
Where's the food area? I think, is it that pink area at the bottom?
No, it's the food area is not. No, this is the rides and equipment. So this is the people who are building the roller coasters and World Ride Service, SimWorks. The food area is up. Oops, crap! Keep hitting the wrong button. It's very small this year. It's just up in here, the F&B pavilion.
Oh yeah,
which I'm surprised at, because when we went, we didn't.
You don't even need to buy lunch.
You don't need to buy lunch because you're sampling everything. And there's a lot of great stuff. There's also an entire area on redemption. You wouldn't think about it, but to have all of the different people you can purchase your trinkets and trash from in one spot is pretty impressive. So, Rhode Island Novelty is where we get ours from. Although, after going to this conference and learning some stuff, as we grow, once we get to 3 or 4 locations, our hope is that we will once again form another branch of our organization and buy direct, skip the middleman, and we'll supply ourselves, but also supply other Canadian FECs and people who are doing redemption. Dave and Buster's here, and maybe even a Wonderland and some of the small independents, to provide them Canadian pricing, so you don't have to worry about the shipping cost to get it into Canada from the States, who have already had to pay the import fees to get it from China or wherever it's being manufactured into the US, and then you got to pay it again to get into Canada. There's some economies of scale, and we can learn best practices from these guys on how do you warehouse, how do you ship, how do you do this, and then go from there. Like the possibilities, the amount of ideas that get generated, you have to come home and prioritize. When you went down as Wonderland or Ontario Place, you must have did you buy the water slides from here when you at Ontario Place, or did you just already know the people?
No, we got them from there. I mean, we had an idea of what vendors we wanted to talk to, and we had sort of set up meetings with them saying, hey, we're coming down to the trade show and we would like you to pitch us on what do you think would work in our sort of environment. And we had some things that these boxes we wanted to tick in terms of the attraction, but we really didn't know what it was going to be at the time. And here's where you got to see scale models, mock-ups. In some cases you can demo some things, obviously not water slides, but there'd be some videos and things like that. But yeah, this is where it kind of started, in the slides that we built there. The one that we built that never opened, that's now Wonderland, the Typhoon or whatever, that was conceived here at the show. And so I think the point of this is just to kind of give you guys a sense of how big this industry is and all of the crazy things that you don't even know would exist that would come out of it. And this is where I talked about this gives you, as an operator or potential operator, connection to the people that supply or that make their living sort of supplying and designing for the industry, and the supports that are in there about sort of creating that product. And no attractions operator builds everything from scratch or even comes up with their product concepts and things like that. You need somebody typically to kind of help you push you over that. And if you want to be a mini golf operator, then you're gonna have to find someone who can help you design and build a mini golf course, because anything else is gonna you can do it yourself. It just won't be as good, or it won't be at the level that you're looking for, or maybe it's going to involve a lot of trial and error and cost that you haven't figured out. Food product is a big one where what are the latest trends in the in the food industry to support that. Years ago it was the real big push was on oilless or sort of almost oilless frying systems. So they were sort of really pushing those out about speed. Or pizza. Pizza is like a giant industry on its own for the attractions industry, because I think you could think about any industry, any attraction that you've gone to that serves food, somewhere down the line there's pizza. It's like the ketchup. Well, but one of the big things about pizza is it's not the fastest product to make sometimes, or it wasn't. So example at Wet and Wild, we have a pizza outlet there. You need to be able, like, if you're a pizza outlet in just anywhere on the street, you need to be able to, on Friday night, you're going to have to make so many pizzas because people are calling in orders, and you have your delivery guarantee of 30 minutes, but people are sitting at home waiting for the pizza. So you're kind of okay letting that cook. If you're in the middle of an amusement park and you want to buy a full pizza, you're not okay with 30 minutes for your pizza. So how do you crank out pizzas fast enough so that when someone walks up, you can say, well, I'd like a large pizza, please, that within minutes you have a hot and ready pizza served to them. So like those technologies, you got to find them. You got to, and you learn, from just going down and being part of these associations, that somebody's going to say, hey, we got a technology for you that, I think will really change that. And then you start working the numbers and saying, okay, I can sell twice as many pizzas. It's going to cost me an initial investment of, as Chuck mentioned, there's always a sort of a capital requirement up front, but can you make that money back? When you want to build a roller coaster like Leviathan, the manufacturer should be in there. I think it's B&M Roller Coasters would be here at the trade show. And, yes, I mean, the industry knows who they are, but you could, go down and meet them here, but the design and all this other stuff, but the capital outlay on a ride like that's $30 million. So Wonderland's bottom line isn't going to increase by $30 million if they put in that ride in the first season. So that would be something that they'd factor in and say, okay, what is this going to do for us in the long term, right? Because there's ongoing operating costs as well, but a $30 million investment on a ride is a serious investment. You could build 30 glow zones for the cost of one roller coaster, Chuck. You could have one almost in every neighborhood in Toronto. So the other component to a show like this is that there's quite a bit of training that goes on there. And that's not really, they don't show it on the map, but there's quite a bit of seminars, learnings, things like that. So as a new operator, you may not spend as much time on the floor, but you may spend quite a bit of time in classroom. And those classrooms are led by industry experts, professionals, people who work in existing things. So if it's an FEC forum about, whatever topic you want to talk about, then, that someone in there may be an existing operator that's operated for 10 years and saying, okay, well, I'm going to share with you what I know about this or this particular topic. Or, I've been to ones about just sort of amusement ride safety or training or operator stuff. There could be things about HR or, those kinds of things that have been led by Disney or Universal or SeaWorld or Six Flags or Cedar Fair operators who just, they want to share what they've done and help the industry as a whole grow. So.
Yeah, because that'll be our next little section is on that. I just wanted to show that this is the games and arcade pavilion. So when we were making the decision that we were going to make the investment of purchasing our own redemption and arcade games, Ryan and I spent a lot of time in here. Then they're all set up and you can play them and you can figure them out. And we then were able to go to the people we were going to use to purchase through, because then these guys sell wholesale to another company. Then it's unless you're buying huge amounts, it's easier to go through someone who's going to get the wholesale price and then mark it up to the retail price that we're learning about here. But we were able to determine what games we wanted, but more importantly, what games did we not want, right? And we had learned from our own experience, because when we had the games from Starburst Player One, which is a subset of Cineplex, we tracked all the gameplay. We knew what games were making us money. We knew what games were not getting the amount of plays that the other games were getting. So we understood, and you need to have a balance. Just because one doesn't get a ton of as many plays as the other one, there's a very specific type of person who wants to play that game, and you want to appease them as well. but it provided us with enough knowledge to go and say, this is the list of games that we want. How close can you get to this list? So, I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, is there any questions before I go off this massive map, which is shared in the link is shared in the presentation, which will go up online. Is there any questions, comments?
All right.
Everyone's still alive? I hope so. As you can tell, Mike and I find this to be really exciting and interesting stuff. Hopefully, you guys are finding it interesting as well.
We're just big attractions nerds is basically what we are.
Absolutely, 100%. All right.
So here's another example. I think, I posted up this video. IAAPA is one thing, it's a trade show or it's a trade association that has a trade show. It has training components, different things like that. But then we highlighted something like zoos and aquariums, and obviously they have different needs. Obviously you're not going to have a trade show, or I hope you don't have a trade show to sort of, where are you going to get your tigers from? I think that's in Tiger King, I think. But, obviously they operate in a different space. So what their trade associations for, and this video kind of highlights this is the Canadian zoos and aquariums thing, is that their trade association is more about public perception and about highlighting the need and sort of we'll say sort of what is the purpose of these of these attractions. Obviously it's somewhat of a topical thing because there's a lot in the sort of the media about whether they serve a purpose or if they're, is it cruel? Is it, all those things are, what in the, sort of era of us, sort of understanding, climate change and how man has impacted the environment and all those things. How does zoos serve a purpose? So, this is how they, as an association of, they support the industry about talking about why they exist and what benefit it has. Right. So they've taken a different approach to it. So, it's a lot different, and I'll say, and that's why I kind of put it in there to give a sense of how, it's not always about like that sort of lights and glitz or whatever, or, in the attractions world, it was very, it's very sort of in your face, very loud or whatever, whereas these guys kind of take it a very different way.
Well, this is probably one branch of their organization, and one branch of their organization is advocacy. So this is sort of that advocacy side of things, which is another benefit, another reason why a zoo would want to, to be part of this organization. Because as Mike said at the beginning of this, they only exist off of member dues. So they have to provide value to their membership or they wouldn't have any members. Maybe that's why you look at the International Laser Tag Association, was only open for 10 years. The value that they were providing wasn't enough for the operators. So CAZA does a couple of things. They do advocacy to show why zoos are an important and aquariums are an integral part of the social fabric, but they also have a certification program, right? So that if it's a CAZA, then they have met some certain standards, and sometimes the CAZA pulls their membership from people who aren't living up to what the CAZA standards are.
Yeah. So if you wanted to plan a trip with your family to go see an animal attraction, then, you would certainly be more inclined to go to one that you knew was reputable in that way. Maybe, you don't want to go to whatever, what's his face from Tiger King was running down there, because now that like he was, serving the tigers, whatever expired Walmart meats, or maybe, Carol Baskin's husband was eaten by a tiger and all those other things. But, that a CAZA accredited facility is going to meet very, specific standards on animal care and welfare and how they procure their animals and how they treat them. And I'm pretty sure that, serving them, expired meats or things like that wouldn't be part of that.
That's right.
So, but anyway,
we'll watch this thing. I think it's 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
3 minutes. So that was an advocacy piece, right? Like that was aimed at consumers, as much as it was aimed at their own membership, right? That's a tough business to be in. There is a lot of public opinion around zoos and aquariums that doesn't exist around mini golf or amusement parks. So to help people get an understanding of the good that is happening, they need to do these public opinion pieces. So that is one of the benefits, or one of the reasons why a zoo or an aquarium would get into, become a member of that. In I think one of the ones that is most prevalent in Ontario for attractions is called Attractions Ontario, and I was on the board for 13 years. And Troy's been there. I hired Troy, I guess 13 years ago, just as I was starting. And actually it's probably 15 years when I started, because I've been off the board for a bit. Regardless, they started just as a marketing group. The whole benefit, the whole reason that Attractions would join Attractions Ontario is that it allowed them to get some economies of scale when it came to their marketing reach. But it has grown far beyond that to an advocacy group. So, Troy, who's the executive director of Attractions Ontario, sat on the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario Board of Directors. He has a direct line to the minister. There we go. They connect the attractions back and forth to one another. Most attractions can't afford to be members of IAAPA. I don't think that right now. I don't think Glowzone's a member of IAAPA. It's an expensive proposition. We invest in going down to the trade show, and we're going to talk about why in this next thing with training, the training and development partners. But you don't need to go down to IAAPA, because for $50 or $150 a year, you can become a member of Attractions Ontario. And if you're in the industry, if you're part of that industry as an owner, as a manager, and you want to, you don't need to know everyone. You need to know one or two people who then know everyone. Right. So when we're making plans, one of the things we wanted to do was connect with the rest of the attractions in Brampton and Mississauga, because we wanted to promote them as Glowzone. Once again, talking about when the tide rises, the boat's going up. If we know that people aren't going to come to Glowzone every single week, but if we can make part of their habit going out once a week to an attraction, so they come to Glowzone, go bowling, do rock climbing, do go-karts, go and play at Dave & Buster's at one of the bigger arcades. If that becomes a weekly routine, they're going to come back to Glowzone more often than if it's only an afterthought once every month or 2 months that they're actually going out, because we're still not going to get them. They're not only going to come to us. So we wanted to connect with our neighbors so that we could tell people about other places to go. And hey, if you liked us, you should go to the bowling alley. You should go to the Aspire climbing gym. There's a ton of different places that we connected with to get them to to try to encourage people to get out more often, spend more money, which seems counterintuitive to convince them to spend money somewhere else to come back and play with us. But if you've, as we're getting into the holiday season, if you've ever watched, was it Miracle on 34th Street? That's the one where they had the Santa that was sending people from Gimbels, which was where he was hired, and he was sending them across to Macy's or vice versa. And the manager got so angry at him, like, why are you sending the customers to the competitors? And the woman came up and thanked him because she was able to get exactly what she needed, and said, because you did that and helped me, I'm going to shop here more often. So that was built in that was a movie from 1934? Like, it's an old movie. And that concept existed in 1934, and it's still, people don't get it today. I'm going down a rabbit hole, Mike. Pull me out.
All right. So let's look at the next slide here.
Okay.
So training and development partners. So that was the sort of the next component that we looked at. And maybe it's 10 o'clock or 9:57. So let's take a little break here, I think.
All right.
And then we'll sort of jump into this. So what, 10 minutes again, Chuck? Does that work?
Yeah. So was that at 10:08?
Well, we'll call it, 10:08, 10:09, somewhere around there, depending on where you are.
All right. Perfect.
Okay.
All right, guys. We'll see you in a couple minutes. I'm gonna brew another pot of coffee.
There you go.
I opted not to make coffee, Michael.
Oh, what did you do?
Oh, I had a bunch of emails. I've got a board meeting at 1 today.
Yeah, you're telling me that.
So had to answer a few emails regarding it, and off we go. Let us know if you're back with a raise of the thumbs or a quick note in the chat box. We got 2. All right. Nah, Shad is there, and I think I saw Talis. Her name disappeared for a second, so I'm assuming Talis, you're there. You were there as well. All right.
Let's roll.
Let's continue on, Michael.
Okay. So training, so we're going to talk just a little bit about training development in the same way that, much as all these other sort of, the trade associations and all that are optional. Like they're optional. Like you can do your own stuff. Where these things fit in though is that they do, they do support the industry and make the industry stronger, and in some cases create standards that sort of cross companies or jurisdictions, things like that help sort of create these sort of SOPs, and there's this, we'll call it the standard of the industry, so that when you are sort of thinking about doing something in attractions, that if it requires some level of skill or training or knowledge that maybe you can't get anywhere else, or that it's sort of in a lot of cases it would have been sort of experience based, that they can consolidate that, and some of these partners will help make you better, or they'll sort of provide the training programs for you so you don't have to create them on your own, and know that they're sort of comfortably equivalent to what everybody else is doing. And some sections of the industry are a lot more willing to sort of participate in that level of training because of the safety need, or because the industry itself has kind of developed this sort of best practice that everybody kind of falls in line with. So up on the screen kind of noted some very common players in those spaces. As you can see, they're mostly like amusements sort of level providers, and in no particular order, looking at these. IAAPA, which we talked about, is not only a trade association, but a major player in the training sort of part of the industry. And, as I mentioned before, they have seminars, classes, online. It's not just part of the trade show, it goes year round. So they will, you need to be a member, but if you're a member, you can access sort of a very large catalog of courses, trainings, learnings that can help you as an operator get through sort of the things that you're looking for, or maybe help you learn things that you didn't have experience with, or just sort of generally make you sort of better. And I think I've taken classes on, or courses on sort of finance and risk management and training and development and human resources, and it goes on. And I'm sure Ryan, I think, has been very active with the IAAPA as well, Chuck's partner, and done quite a lot of training, and a lot of it is very collaborative too. So it's great to work with experts in the field and have that really back and forth conversation about what are you doing and why do you do it, and how do you make that work, because I've always tried this, but it always sort of, it's difficult, or I fall flat on my face and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
one of the things we did, the IAAPA is a 5-day conference, so we spent a lot of time on the floor, but the rest of the time we spent in 2 different types of education sessions. One were more of a lecture where people were sharing best practices and what was working, and were letting us know what the state of the industry was in certain buckets, all completely geared to family entertainment centers. So the courses that were available that we signed up for were just specifically for family entertainment centers. People who ran water parks were at a whole different series of lectures and meetings. So we had a lecture series, but there was also all these amazing round table series. You know, one was on birthday parties and how do you do birthday parties, and you sit at a table with, and Ryan and I both went, but sat at different tables and talked with 9 other operators about what were they doing right, what, you know, what was working, what wasn't working, how are we doing it. And we all shared and all came out of those experiences better off for it. You know, it's very cool. The one thing we left out of here, and I should have put it on last night, Mike, is OTEC, which is the Ontario Tourism Education Centers. And they're a not-for-profit as well that develops courses more general than, like, a lot of this is very specific to attractions itself, but they run customer service and connecting people and helping raise tourism awareness and all of these different things. A lot of social media. You know, how do you do marketing? How do you do all of these different places so that tourism operators, whether they're attractions or accommodators, or conservation authorities, have an opportunity to go in and send their staff to become better trained.
Definitely. And you know, when you look at some of the examples up here on the board, other than, you know, IAAPA, you know, some of them are doing the same thing, and then they kind of compete against each other. So, you know, people in the industry can pick and choose. And, you know, examples up here, like something like AIMS International or NARSO. And these are associations or organizations that specialize in the training and development of ride safety. And not so much for operators, but for maintenance and upkeep of those things. So, you know, your ride mechanics and things like that, where, you know, there is no program where if you wanted to learn how to become a roller coaster maintenance technician, you know, there isn't a specific college course or, you know, like a thing that you could do where, you know, most of those technicians are coming out of other fields, you know, typically millwrights or heavy machine mechanics. And, you know, to build associations within the industry to help train those people to do inspections, to do maintenance and those kinds of things on those attractions is a really attractive thing to do, because there are such specialized pieces of equipment that need, you know, certain knowledge or experience to be able to handle them. You know, AIMS and NARSO, you know, offer a certification type program. So when, you know, you can take your staff and get them certified, you know, and they hold a certificate that is recognized throughout the industry. So if you are, you know, if you have a NARSO or an AIMS certificate and you are, you know, a person looking for employment in the industry, then you could use that as a ticket to go towards those things. So it kind of works in both ways, or as an operator or as a company that's operating attractions that hires or employs people that are in the maintenance of it, then you can use that as a way to validate the skills of your employees and say that, you know, they're certified at level 1, 2, 3, whatever it is in those programs. And usually those involve sort of annual learning or writing an exam and different things like that sort of boost that up. But it helps, you know, it helps the industry in that way, because, you know, you're dealing with sort of niche products, you know, equipment that may not be, you know, something that a lot of people are going to have experience with, and you're going to take existing knowledge and sort of apply it and then go across that. And it can talk about just general, you know, sort of topics that are sort of related to that you're not going to get anywhere else. You know, when I look at here, you know, we've got like international ride training is one I put up there, which is sort of a new thing. And when I was kind of in the sort of, you know, heavy into the ride operations thing, didn't really exist, but now it's sort of taken the entire industry over. And, you know, all of these parks are perfectly capable of training their own operators, and they do on the specific equipment, but they use it as a, you know, a lot of the sort of major chains like Six Flags, Cedar Fair, Disney, all that use this IRT sort of program, and obviously all of these places are either nonprofits or they're for-profit companies. Like, you know, IRT is for-profit. They supplement your existing training, create standards that are across the industry, and make, the sort of industry itself safer as a whole, or that's their aim. And so these parks see value in it. To do it. I mean, everything about this is, as Chuck mentioned before, there has to be some value from this for you to do it. And a lot of these park chains see big value in it because, one, same thing, you can go to, you can say to your clients that that they have, they're being trained by a third party reputable organization. And the other part too is it connects you to the industry and makes you stay with the standard, stay with, keep with the Joneses, so to speak, so that, if, you're not lagging behind other attractions, in terms of your quality and how you sort of roll those things out and the awareness that you have. And, generally there, you kind of look at safety as your tent pole, and you're gonna, you're not gonna cheap out on that, obviously, and you're going to look at ways in which you can become better, because reputationally, liability wise, all those things sort of apply in as an operator. And so whenever you can kind of grab hold of the sort of this wealth of industry knowledge and apply it to your own operation, if it makes sense for you, you're going to go after it. Two of the ones I put up there, the EA and NASCO, those are water park training providers. And, they provide certification and training for lifeguards and sort of ongoing training for the water park industry. ENA is probably the largest player in that field. Most, if I would say probably 80% of the major water parks in North America apply some level of sort of external lifeguard training that's not, in Ontario, we have the Life Saving Society and the NLS and all those things that are required by law to be a lifeguard here in Ontario. And these are training programs that are specifically designed for water park lifeguarding, and they're not needed. You could open a water park in Ontario and not have your lifeguards trained and certified in these programs. That's totally fine. But a lot of them use this because it's a very specific water park lifeguarding training model. I'll say that, in all of my experience in the attractions industry, water parks tend to be the most, how can I say, kind of collective about how they go about training and standardization and all that kind of stuff. So there's a feeling that you get in when you go in a water park and you see lifeguards operating, and that they're all consistently trained and they do the exact same things. And how could that be that, the water park at Wonderland and the water park at Disney and the water park here, and if you look at their staff and how they operate and what they do, it's identical. And the reason it is because they're using these training partners that have created these very rich programs, richer than what you could develop on your own as an operator. And because of the risk, and when we get into risk management, I think next week, we're going to look at that. But in terms of risk, water parks have a very high risk because of the nature of their attractions. When you look at amusement devices themselves, you could control that by mechanical means, but all of a sudden when you start talking about pools and water and things like that, there's a lot less control. So where you have less control over the environment, you spend more on training, and so your training gets a little bit more elaborate. So these water park examples are sort of great examples of how an industry as a whole has sort of almost universally decided that this is the way to go. and it's a really unique, sort of case on that. If you kind of called up all these water parks in the States, call up Disney and say, who trains your lifeguards? They're going to go ENA. If you call up Cedar Point in Ohio, who trains your lifeguards? ENA. And it's because at the beginning, the water park industry is not that old. I think, when you talk about sort of probably in the 1980s is when water parks really became a thing. There used to be just slides at pools and stuff like that. But when it became a thing, it very early on, they recognized, or somebody recognized, the need for this. And they built a really successful business out of that became almost the de facto standard for the industry. So, but they create these sort of training programs and licensing and certifications and sort of create, just create some, that sort of feeling of, the professionalism in the industry that sort of permeates the whole thing. So
just something you said earlier in this section is it's important to have more than one player. And the reason for that is it keeps any of these training companies, it forces them to stay absolutely current on whatever the regulations are in terms of standards that are either law or that sort of thing throughout North America. It also makes it so that they know that their customers have another option to go to. They're not the end all be all. So it is a little bit of an ego check. And I know we're going to watch this video next, and you know, these guys, it's from EA, and these guys know that they're number one, but man, don't be cocky about it. And
well, they know it, and they have swagger, and that's because they're so big. Like NASCO is a tiny player, and they, you know, in the United States, and there's the Red Cross as well, but ENA is just a monster. So they know that they know what they are. And but yes, as Chuck said, it drives innovation, it drives change. They themselves can't keep their program static. They need to look for new and you know, in better ways. And you know, I will say overall, the standard of lifeguarding in the water park industry is miles ahead of what the recreational pool industry is doing. And that's not to say that the recreational setting, like your local community centers, is bad. It's just that the water park one is just, you know, they have gone so much further than what those people with recreational institutions have done. And there's a lot of reasons for that, you know, and some of it's just about sort of how the industry organizes itself, and that, you know, there's quite a lot less players, or that, you know, the players are like, you know, when you talk about like a large, you know, sort of chain like Six Flags or whatever, they own many parks, so it's easy to roll a consistent standard, as opposed to when you're talking about something that maybe locally operated, like a community center would be by your town or whatever, that it just gets really confusing and difficult. So hard to agree. But yeah, that innovation has driven them to a point where they keep getting better and better. And you know, they can sort of show their safety statistics and say, this is an insanely, you know, good record that we're building here. You know, you don't hear every day about, you know, people sort of drowning at water parks, and there's a reason for it, and the industry would fall apart if it didn't. So yeah, that's kind of where, you know, where that builds from.
Well, I see that because NASCO's 1974. Did both these players, do you think they started as waterfront certifications for, you know, ocean and lake guards, like Baywatch kind of thing?
You know, their genesis was kind of different. ENA came out of, well, the environment in the United States for lifeguarding as a whole is a little bit of a different thing. Whereas up here in Canada, we're okay with kind of accepting a monopoly on an industry. So you have, you know, right now there are only two recognized agencies that provide lifeguard certification in Ontario: the Red Cross and the Life Saving Society. Up until 2019, there was only one, and that was the Life Saving Society. So and that's baked into into the sort of the Pool Act, the Recreational Pool Act. It says that your lifeguard must be trained in this program. In the United States, which, you know, I think we can also, you know, they have a different philosophy on these things, and they're much more free enterprise. And so what they'll say, yeah, you can operate a pool, but your lifeguard needs to be trained. And so then what they do is they create a standard for training, and they have what they call the Model Aquatic Code down there. So that basically says, well, we have 50 states, and so let's federalize it a little bit and say that, you know, we're not going to tell you how to do it, but this is what your training needs to include. And so that sort of created a lot of, we'll say, an entrepreneurial system where you have many agencies that are vying for their slice of the pie. So they're like, I could get up in the morning and say, well, I'm pretty good at lifeguarding, and I've done it a long time, so I'm going to create Mike's lifeguarding program. And as long as it met the elements of the code, then I could register it in the state, and they'd say, yeah, you're an official provider. So ENA kind of was born out of that. There was a gentleman named Jeff Ellis who saw a gap because the water parks were starting to spring up everywhere. And he said, well, why don't I create a program that's specifically for water parks? NASCO was I'll say for a while, NASCO actually worked with ENA. So their people were actually like almost like a guest speaker at ENA conferences, and then they kind of went on their own and did it. They started with like river rescue and sort of open water rescue courses and things like that down in Texas where they're from. So they were training fire departments and different places like that on how to rescue people from rivers and creeks and things like that. And then they got into sort of backyard, well, so not backyard, but recreational pools and stuff like that. The same thing that, you know, the environment down there's a little bit different, right? So you have these sort of independently run, and we're starting to see in Ontario, like where you have people that own and operate swimming pools that aren't a city. So like, you know, you have someone's swim school or this and that, and they're operating their own like a privately run for-profit pool. There's a lot more of that in the States. So they kind of started there, but they sort of recognized this space, and they grew and they grew and they grew, and they grew in an industry that was growing rapidly at the same time, where this water parks went from an unheard of entity to, you know, just a big component of the attractions industry in a very short amount of time. And, you know, all of it kind of was a culmination of, you know, somebody finding a niche, these companies like ProSlide and Whitewater West all of a sudden entering the scene and saying, you know, we can build these things. So then you had this sort of product innovation that was pushing it along at the same time and got you to this space. But yeah, it's that's kind of how they got created, and now they're fairly firmly entrenched, you know, into the sort of the culture of water parks. And then, you know, it probably helped them because the industry really wasn't that big when they got started, as opposed to like amusement rides and stuff like that, which is, they've been going on forever. I mean, you can look back and say, well, there's been like 100 years of people operating rides in some form or fashion, and it just gets more and more organized. Whereas water parks and their training providers kind of grew at the same time. So it's sort of like a perfect storm, but it did create them. That, you know, as I mentioned before, ENA is I'll say is the de facto sort of water park training provider, you know, in North America, and internationally they're growing. They have footprints in like Asia and the Middle East and Europe and things like that. They're a big player.
Okay, well, I guess we should listen to them for their minute of fame here.
Mm-hmm.
See, right there, the gold standard.
They got nice swag too.
Yeah. Luckily, it's only a minute.
Ellison Associates is built on a simple commitment: 0 drownings. Lifeguards in over 750 client facilities in 29 countries around the world live that commitment every day. We live it too. You really don't become the world's leader in aquatic safety by standing still. We're constantly innovating, developing new tools and technologies, but it starts with listening to our client partners first.
We never rest on what we've done in the past, and we feel that ENA is the same way. They are constantly trying to improve their programs, improve their knowledge base.
The Comprehensive Aquatic Risk Management Program is the gold standard in the aquatic industry today. When we say Ellison Associates, the associates are our clients are ENA. Each one committed to elevating the entire aquatics industry. One voice, one goal, 0 drowning.
They put on a slick video, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, I don't know about you, but I want to build a water park now.
Ellison.
Well, but you're talking about innovation. They have to keep up, because, you know, out of all of the different, you know, you look at, everyone is in competition to create the biggest and the best.
Mm-hmm.
What the new things that keep coming out in water parks change what they have to train. So, you know, I look at Wonderland this year. They put in dive platforms.
I called them when my friend told me that they were putting them in. I was like, "Are you out of your mind?" But they did it, yeah, and
yeah. So
bumps in the road.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, so suddenly, instead of just coming down and sliding into 18 inches of water, you know, and think about how the slides. You guys probably don't remember when Sunshine Beach went up. Sunshine Beach is where Wet n Wild is now. But it was a lot different when it came to safety. You know, once again, it was a different time, and that was late 80s.
Yeah, and they weren't even the first water slides in Canada. The first ones were at Ontario Place, and they were even more interesting.
Yeah, but you know, they were you're still, the lifeguards had to be able to go from a slide that they had to be up in the pools, because there was one slide that you had 1,000 people in inner tubes at a time sliding 10 feet down into the next pool, and then 10 feet into the next pool, and you had to have guards everywhere. And to the big flume rides where you just hold on for dear life, but you're never in more than an inch of water, to the ones where they're coming down and getting dumped 5 feet into the water, or 5 or 6 feet of water. And now they're taking it to this next level where people are trying to conquer some fears of heights and are jumping from 30 feet. Like, I think they had a 10 meter platform there, right, Mike?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do.
If anyone if any of you have a chance to go to the aquatic centers, there's I guess Scarborough's got a diving place.
Yep.
Etobicoke
Olympium
has one. Go up, if you ever have a chance, go up to the 10-meter platform and take a look and jump off. It's insane to do it.
Yes, it is.
And you have now suddenly lifeguards who have been trained in the past, the deepest water out of water park had only ever been the deep end of a wave pool, which is usually under 6 feet, right? Around 6 feet deep.
6 feet is about as deep as you go, yeah.
Yeah, because you have a wave that then crests over you at 3 or 4 feet on top of that to give that illusion of depth. And now you're asking someone to jump into 20 feet of water. And now a lifeguard who has to be trained to be able to get down to the bottom in case the person doesn't come back up. Right? So it's forcing the Ellis and Associates and the NASCOs and just the risk management people at each of these parks to really reconsider. But the amusement park owners and operators are always going to push the limits.
Mm-hmm.
The one last week we saw that great picture of Calypso with those double loops. Well, who would have thought that you could ever develop a water slide that actually inverts you in the ride? And I did that ride, and I'm a big guy, so I got a lot of speed going. But what happens when a little kid goes and doesn't get the speed and goes up halfway and drops down? Like these are things that.
Well, you gotta watch that Class Action Park on whatever streaming service, that it tells you exactly what happens when you build a looping water slide and you don't know what you're doing.
It's not good. It's not a good thing.
Well, I'll just say it's the loss of a lot of teeth is probably the end result.
Right.
But yeah, I think you're right in that these training partners are they're part of the industry. They're part of the industry that most of the public don't know about. But they do drive. They drive the innovation and they keep the standards very high. In a lot of cases with lifeguarding, the water park lifeguarding is, and like I said, it leads the sort of lifeguarding world in terms of quality and about just standards and just how vigorous they are in their training. And some of the components of that have spilled out into the greater sort of water park world, because now you've got these lifeguards coming out of these different programs that work at these water parks, and all of a sudden you got these sort of recreational pool operators that were kind of relying on more traditional sort of training, and they're sitting there going, wow, they're really good, and we want to incorporate that. So then they go to their training providers and say, why can't we do this? And one great example is in the video they show those foam tubes, the rescue tubes that the lifeguards use. Those, up until about 10 years ago, you would not have seen them anywhere but a water park. And now, even programs like the NLS and Red Cross and all that, they're component pieces, because the people were sitting there going, why are they using them and what is the benefit to them? And all of a sudden they were like, wow, these are really good and we can apply these in here. So it's actually an example where the amusement industry was leading from the front and creating a standard that was so high that other people were starting to recognize it and saying, we need to do this too, because we're lagging behind. And some of the stats would show back on when I was really kind of heavy into the sort of water park training business was, you know, in the 90s and early 2000s, where water park safety was measures better than your safety at your local community pools and things like that. And that was because of the industry's adoption of these training methods and standards, and just being, as we said, innovative, because it was by necessity, because you were creating these aquatic environments that were much higher risk because they were more active, they were more intense, they had more elements, they were deeper, faster, stronger, whatever those things were, that you needed to react to it, because the status quo wasn't going to cut it, because the industry wouldn't be able to survive it because if they weren't able to innovate on the product side and come up with these slides and products and all that kind of stuff, then you'd be kind of stuck with what water parks were in the 80s, which were like a few pools here and there, and the slides all kind of look the same. And now you can look at these sort of catalog of what's out there between, like, looping slides, drop slides, these sort of like curved half pipe walls and all these other things, and action rivers and wave pools, and just the stuff that's out there, that the training side and the product side had to go along at the same speed to make that all work, because you would have this sort of high, you know, that you're adding an element of risk that you need to be able to control, and you're either controlling that in some mechanical means, or you're controlling it through your training. And in water parks, you do both, but training is a very high focus there, because there are elements that you can't control, because it's a human element. You know, you're putting somebody in an interactive area and saying, okay, well, you know, we can't trust that you're going to be able to do that, because, you know, swimming capabilities are different from person to person and all these other things. So we're going to have to put in a control, and the control is the people that we're putting on the stand to watch these things, and we need to develop our own programs for that. So, but those are examples, and they're they're great examples of how the training sort of we'll say industry within amusements and attractions supports the overall success of the industry, and where those things go out of. And something like IROC, which I mentioned kind of briefly about that ride operator training, why that sort of came about is because somebody sat there and said, what are like a lot of these operators, especially when you talk about amusement parks, they operate at a water park and they operate hard rides. And you're seeing on your water park side, your training level is super high, and your performance is actually pretty good. You're looking at your staff are really good, and your incident rates are really low, but you don't have anything like that on your hard ride side. And so then somebody sat there and said, well, why can't I take the sort of lessons that were learned in the water park industry and apply it to hard rides? And a lot of people tried and it didn't work out, but these guys made it work. And now they're becoming, I will say, a fraction of this sort of, the prevalence in the industry, but they're starting to get into, because some of those large operators that have those sort of two sides are sitting there going, if I had a lot of benefits from doing this on the water park side, then I should be able to realize them on the hard ride side. And none of these are free for these parks to do. They're expenses. They pay these companies to provide the training certification. Maybe it's a per license cost, or maybe it's a retainer or anything else like that. So right back to what we said, there has to be value to it because it's a for-profit industry. So they see it and they saw the value in applying it against another section of their business.
Well, and they're getting so large that they do things like train the trainer. So Mike, you were a certified instructor, so you could train your staff at
exactly,
a place.
And that's really the only way that it would work. Yeah. So like I would myself, or someone like me at some park would then get trained. So I would go down to their sort of annual training sessions or regional training groups and fly down, spend, a week, 2 weeks or whatever, and, learn the program, and then get certified by them to do this training, and then go up to my home park and then apply the training in there. And then they would come up a couple times a year to audit that, to make sure that you are complying with the program, so that you're not going rogue or doing your own thing and all that kind of stuff, and then give you, some sometimes a score, sometimes a report, just showing that kind of stuff. And if, it cut both ways. So they would tell you how you're doing it. At the same time, if you were not representative of the program, then they could actually just say, cut you loose and say, you know what, we love having you as a client, but no, see you later, because you're not doing it properly, or you're not respecting the program or using it the way that it was intended. So it was very interesting to go through all that stuff. But when we were developing the water park at Canada's Wonderland, I remember spending quite a bit of time where we, sort of went through the best practices of the industry and, talking to other operators and which program do you use, and, why do you like that? And, why do we do it? And at Canada's Wonderland, they use the ENA program with their lifeguards. They don't have to. They're in a lot of the places in the States, those lifeguards are coming in without any certification at all, because like I talked about, the United States is a different environment. So you could pull someone off the street and say, I'm going to run you through my ENA lifeguard program and make you a lifeguard. Here in Ontario, that certificate you get from ENA means nothing. It other than the training that you're doing inside the park. It doesn't have a, if someone from the, public health comes down and says, I'm doing an inspection, I want to make sure all your lifeguards are trained, and you whipped out your binder full of ENA certificates and say, well, that's fantastic. Now show me the one that's actually recognized by law. And so you're getting already trained lifeguards, which is a different environment, but they still see the benefit in using that program. So they use it. And yeah, you don't have to do it, but they're doing it because of the benefit that it brought them.
Well, and to your point, it's because they were so different, because the Life Saving Society, which was the standard, the National Lifeguard Service, NLS level, which allowed you to become a lifeguard, was built for recreational pools. And they also had a waterfront course, so you could then
beach lifeguard or a
beach guard or an ocean guard or something like that. But their mentality was, the mantra was reach, throw, row, go, tow, which was those are your level of engagement with someone who was drowning. First, you would try to reach them with, and that's why at pools you'd always see those big stage hooks. When you ever see people on stage and they get hooked off, it was to reach to them so you didn't actually have any contact with them. You would throw the ring to them to hope they would grab on. You would, there would all these different things. The last thing you ever wanted to do was to get in and actually make contact with the drowning victim. Well, how many minutes would it take to go through all those damn steps before before you finally went in to get them? And in the water park business, that's why those tubes were invented. Was you get in, and here's how you do it: you get in behind them, you jam that underneath their armpits, and you bring them to the surface, and off you go. And
so you take that sort of mantra of that reach, tow, go, throw that you kind of talked about, and it got turned on its head, and then it turned into in a water park environment, the mantra is, if you don't know, you go. And so like they don't even talk about the reach stuff or whatever. One of the more hilarious moments that I had putting the operating or opening the wave pool at Canada's Wonderland is that it has to meet all of the pool regulations, obviously, in Ontario, and one of them requires you to have a throw buoy, one of those ring buoys that has enough rope on it to reach half the distance of the width of your pool plus 2 meters. Well, that makes sense when you're talking about, like, you can picture like a 25-meter pool, and the width of that pool is not 25 meters. Maybe it's 15 meters or something like that. Like, the pools are usually rectangular, right? So they're assuming that you could go onto one deck and throw it, and you could reach halfway plus a little bit across the pool. The wave pool at Canada's Wonderland is almost 100 meters wide. It's wide as fuck. So when I was sitting there with the inspector, he's like, it's right here, Mike, that it's in the code. You have to do this. And I'm like, so I have to put 102 meters of 52 meters of rope on this ring buoy? He's like, that's what it says. I'm like, who other than maybe, Captain America can throw a ring buoy 52 meters? Like, just think of that. I'm like, do I have to like build some sort of launch device to fire this thing across? And it's a purely decorative piece. It's almost like it's kind of a joke, because when they come and do the inspection, we'd say, here it is. And I'm like, if you would like to measure the rope, knock yourself out. But there's a big coil.
But you have to recoil it afterwards.
Yeah, that's right. There's a coil of rope there that's 52 meters long. And, it will never get used because it just doesn't make sense in that environment. And so, yeah, that's kind of an example of where you had to create your own training and standards and stuff to supplement what was around, because the product that you're offering was so unique and it was undefinable, and that nobody in the sort of government is going to be able to sit down and go, well, what happens if you build a pool like this? Because nobody ever did. And there's only like, you know, in the province of Ontario, how many wave pools of that shape and size are there? Maybe 4. So, you know, that, you know, it doesn't make sense for government to get involved in that, right? So it just kind of sits there as a thing. But as an operator of a water park, you have to think about that and say, well, I'm not going to, you know, I'm not going to rely on traditional methods because those won't work.
Well, not only that, they could cause more damage. What the notion of throwing a ring into, so I was a lifeguard growing up, I think, you know, and the pool I worked at had a little dive well with a you know, a 1 meter board and a rope. There was only ever 2 people in there. So when someone didn't, you know, when someone started to drown, you could toss them a ring buoy. You'd always would toss it behind them, you'd pull it, it would hit them, they'd grab onto it. That was what we all trained. Most people just went and put them. But you just, let's take a big hard plastic ring buoy and let's throw it into a pool that has 3,000 people and let's see who
who it hits
who we're
first.
going to give a concussion to or break their nose. Like it,
Yeah.
you know, and this is why this industry is so awesome, is because they're always thinking about what exists, like what are the rules and how do we mitigate what the realities are of these situations to do things like mitigate the risk, the liability, the bad PR. Because could you imagine the, you know, the PR that would come from, yeah, I just broke my nose and lost 2 teeth because someone next to me was drowning. It doesn't make any sense.
No.
And someone thought ahead, thought, okay, well, we're not going to actually use a ring buoy because that's going to, you know, it's bad enough that they had to jump into the water and they had to avoid hitting anyone, you know, just jumping into the water to get across.
Yeah. So you know, and that's a little bit of trivia for you too. You know, if you ever end up in that wave pool at Canada's Wonderland and you see ring buoys and reaching hooks all around the deck, it's because they had to put them in, but they're never used. and they're almost like decor.
That's right. And maybe the regulations have changed. Probably not, because it's a nope.
No, that's never going to change. So yeah, you still need to have a ring buoy, you still need to have the reaching pole, but yeah, first day of training, we just tell them, well, they're here and we're going to inspect that they're there every day, but you are never going to use it. Even, I mean, at my work right now, I mean, we have like these little hot tubs, right, in the locker rooms, and they have a reaching pole and a ring buoy to that, and it's kind of ridiculous when you think about it, right? Like the thing is, like, is, you know, maybe what, 8 feet across, like I could like just grab the person, you know, or like people or stand up and walk out, you know, but it's just regulation that kind of trips on stuff. But the amusement industry sees that a lot, where regulation, you have to follow it, you know, that's the law, that's the regulation, but it doesn't make sense for your environment. So you need to be compliant, but then you need to go a little bit further, because being compliant isn't going to be enough to satisfy your needs as an operator in terms of, you know, maintaining safety and maintaining quality and just being within, you know, the standard of the industry, that, you know, everyone around you is going to operate a certain way, and people who make choices, those guests and visitors to your attraction, are going to make choices based on how you stack up against your competition. And so if your competitor is operating at a very high level and being, you know, very, you know, sort of, as we say, professional and within the state of the industry, and you are not, then chances are that the, you know, people making those decisions to come to an attraction are gonna choose the one that they feel is providing that level of quality, service, and training, and all those kinds of things. Because when you sort of strip it all away, you know, that it's the experience that matters when you're there, right? You can have the very best rides, and that will probably get someone into your gate the first time. But you want that repeat business. You want them to come back. You want them to be seasons pass holders or loyal fans of your business. Then you're going to have to be able to provide that quality at the back end and make people feel comfortable about it. And you know, when people are making decisions about things to put their children on or do those kinds of things, that gets heightened as well, right? You know, if you're going to put your child on a ride or in an attraction, then you have to feel very comfortably that this is being run in a reasonable way, and because that would be, it's just negligent not to, I guess. So, but like if you're looking going, this is pretty sketchy, go ahead, do it. Then that's that's going to be a bit of a problem. So.
Yeah. All right, so with either 7 or 8 minutes left, so next week what we're going to do is we're going to tie it all together, tie everything we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks about regulation, and now the associations and what what everyone does, and this whole notion of sharing best practices, and how that mitigates risk and liability. That's the main one, right? And if you can mitigate your risk, that also mitigates the amount of bad PR or media you would get, not just for your own business, but for all like businesses out there. And of course, it also mitigates your own businesses getting poor service and reviews, right? Those are business killers. And the top ones, the risk and the liability, well, the top three can be industry killers. Right? If enough things happen at water parks at the same time, different water parks, it's bad if it's just one water park that the same 3 or 4 incidents take place at. It's going to make people think twice about going to any water park, but they probably will, because they know that it was really only one water park that things were happening in. That water park's going to be done. If 3 or 4 things happen at water parks across North America that are front page national news within a set amount of time, it might really put a downward trend on people's comfort level going to a water park, because they don't want to be the next victim. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about that, and then Mike and I are going to spend some time and come up with 2 or 3 or whatever number we come up with of some case studies that we're going to walk through as a group, and talk about what are all the things that you would have to consider to make sure that there's limited risk, limited liability. It's going to not lead to bad PR or bad reviews. And then we're going to do we're going to give you your last assignment, which is really assignment number 3, although we've already given you assignment number 4, which is the cumulative one. And we'll talk about that, and I will work towards making sure I've got the rubric for that one already done as well. So things that you will get this week, you're going to get your marks from your last assignment. You'll get the rubric for the cumulative assignment, and then next week you will get the we'll get the last assignment out the door along with the rubric. So hopefully, like I really I actually texted Mike at one of the breaks, and I said I really enjoy this sort of almost like an interview style today, because Mike is really the expert at this sort of thing more than I am. So hopefully you found it informative today. Next week I think will be more fun in terms of the storytelling. We'll be able to do it like those last couple of stories you were talking about, Mike. Like that's the kind of stuff that blows my mind every time I hear something like that. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns from the 4 of you that are here today? No.
Looks like we're good.
I hope that we're good. All right, so I'm just going to stop. I guess I can stop the recording. I'll stop sharing. There we go. I'll stop the recording, and then